that the General Assembly of the UN met yesterday. Trump hasn't lost his voice yet. There's been an earthquake in Mexico. There are many things going on which seem to be out of the control of the Catalonian leaders. This foundation, where we're holding this event, the Charles of Antwerp Foundation, is a miracle foundation. Well, a difficult to explain foundation in the sense that it started to operate. It was established in 1594, and at a time of major historical events, and after all the things that have happened in Spain and in other countries, the foundation has continued to operate, and always, in spite of the great challenges they've had to face, and they've kept on making new proposals. And one of those proposals is this meeting that brings us here today. We're going to talk today about the digital Europe.
Europa.
Europe will be digital, or it may not be digital, but I think it's going to be digital whether we like it or not. Digital Europe, competitiveness, progress, and integration. The first panel will be towards a digital union, and the second panel will deal with the digital single market. What is a digital single market? Is it useful? Do we believe that creating such a digital union is useful in such a difficult context in the integration process? Yesterday evening at the Employers Association, a book was presented that I highly recommend you to read, because it's very much in line with the fact that Europe has to wake up and take its future under control. And it has to deal with some challenges, such as Trump, as an opportunity. The book is called Make Europe and Not War by Enrique Nicoletta, and it's full of very interesting observations, also in the digital sphere. It's been written in a very direct style. The author hasn't fallen into the academic trap, something that would have been very easy for him to do, because he now chairs the Paris School of International Affairs in Sciences Po, and the School of Sciences Po. So this is just to tell you that Europe continues to move and do things. Europe needs its citizens. Europe needs to connect with its citizens. Europe cannot be a bureaucratic machine. Something that has been criticized by everyone, bureaucracy in Brussels. There's a proposal called to de-Bruxelize Europe. Europe is more than Brussels. Europe is a unique concept. Europe is something that other people don't have. Europe is the welfare state, but that welfare state that has its own digital translation and reflection That welfare state that is the pride and admiration of so many people, now because of the crisis and other problems, has started to be seen as a burden. And instead of exporting rights and freedoms, an attempt has been made to import slavery. And that's not the solution for us. That's not the solution for Europe. So, to discuss these topics and to help Europe become more digital, we've organized this session, this event. I apologize for the delay. And now there have been some traffic jams. We've tried to be condescending, but I'd like to give the floor to our partner in the Elcano Institute. Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning to one and all. Good morning, Ambassador. Good morning to other speakers, representatives of the European Commission in Madrid, authorities.
Sobre la jornada.
One is about this cycle of lectures talking about Europe, which is
Secretaría de Estado de Unión Europea, de la cual la Fundación Carlos Damberes, pero otras muchas fundaciones.
Many other foundations have benefited from this sessions and from the European spirit. So this cycle of lectures started as one of the legacies of the Spanish presidency of 2010. Every presidency has its legacy, and this legacy started when the Belgian ambassador, because the foundation Charles of Antwerp is really a miracle, to come into this beautiful house and see Rubens is a miracle in itself. It's really fantastic. But the activities organized by the foundation, the very nice and relaxed atmosphere, the fact that it's a meeting point for so many years, it's a meeting point for embassies, for Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Well, the Belgian ambassador called us. At the time, the Lisbon Treaty was starting to be discussed, and a different type of presidencies were held. Anyways, that first presidency after the Lisbon Treaty, co-chaired by Spain, Belgium, and Luxembourg, I remember the Belgian embassy wanted to promote the idea, taking advantage of the fact that each semester there's a different presidency. And even though they're less relevant now because the presidency doesn't chair the Commission nor the other institutions, but it still plays a very important role in other 9 groups of the Council, the internal market, the ECOFIN, etc. And we thought that the right place to have those talks was this foundation. So we have to thank the Charles of Antwerp Foundation for doing this. And with the help of other bodies such as the Elcano Royal Institute and the European Commission, we've continued to support this, and also with the involvement of the embassy of a country that holds the presidency. So for 7 years, we've been having these cycles of lectures. There have been some years during which the country that held the presidency wanted to organize their own events. But it's great that we are able to have this meeting now with the presidency of Estonia, and we're very happy to be able to contribute something. Every 6 months, the Charles of Antwerp Foundation reminds us of which is a country that has a presidency. Now it's Estonia that has a presidency. Next time it will be Bulgaria. It should have been the UK, by the way, but the British preferred to step aside. But yes, it should have been the UK that had the presidency during the first semester of 2018. Anyways, the country that has the presidency at the time decides what kind of priorities and features of that country and Europe they want to discuss. And what better choice, taking into account the personality of a country like Estonia. When we talk about countries in Central and Eastern Europe, sometimes we emphasize some countries and member states that have a problematic relationship with the idea of European integration. But this is not the case of Baltic countries and specifically Estonia, which is very committed to the idea of Europe. In the case of Estonia, there are no issues. When we enlarged Europe towards the south in 1986 and Spain and Portugal joined the Union, also Malta and Cyprus joined some years ago. Well, Spain and Portugal, apart from receiving a lot of things from the European community, we also contributed great things to Europe. Ideas, enthusiasm about Europe, geopolitical projection provided by the Iberian Peninsula. But in the case of Estonia, Estonia is a similar case. It's a smaller member state than Spain and Portugal, yes. But in the case of Estonia, Estonia is a country that is benefiting greatly from European integration. It's an avant-garde country, it's part of the Eurozone and Schengen. Estonia has no doubts about being a member of Europe, but Estonia has also contributed greatly to European integration. Estonia, and this is something that has to do with the commitment of other member states in the attempts to protect their borders belonging to the Western space, but Estonia has also contributed a great European spirit. They've had no doubts that they wanted to be part of Europe. And even though they're a small country, they're promoting everything that has to do with the internal market in general and the single digital market in particular, where Estonia has always been a leading country. And I will conclude with this. Even though I'm not an expert, and we're going to hear from some experts, one of my colleagues from Elcano Institute will talk about the digital Europe, I'd like to say that for the future of European integration, we sometimes talk about vital issues, about the management of the Eurozone. We talk a lot about migratory flows, border control. We talk a lot about security, terrorism. But together with those elements that may be more pressing or more urgent, the future of Europe lies in its ability to be present in globalization, in modern economy, and the promotion of the rights of citizens. For example, the digital citizen. In 2017, in the 21st century, you cannot be a true citizen if you don't have digital rights, if citizens cannot move in a digital, globalized world. And we're not talking just about companies, but about the service sector. We're not just talking about innovation or the world of academia. No, we're talking about citizens as well. But undoubtedly, apart from creating a framework of rights for all, because the ability to have access to information, communication, and debate, everything that revolves around the digital society, Europe needs to contribute to the digital revolution. We cannot accept for the US, Korea, Japan, and China to be the only promoters of digital technologies. And we need to do it in a European way under the leadership of the Commission, with the support of member states, one of them Estonia. And by the way, Spain, it may seem that this is not a priority for the Spanish agenda, and it's true that it could be more of a priority, but things are not that bad in Spain from a digital point of view. And when we talk about Europe becoming European, we have to do things in line with the European framework. Those who say we want a digital Europe, we should say it in a credible way. It shouldn't be just words of politicians. No, there should be true leadership by the European Commission that should make proposals that the member states should accept. The role of the European institutional framework is very important. The Commission, the Council, the Court. We should talk about the European framework as a whole. It's not just a matter of saying this is very important. No, we're talking about regulatory changes, rewards, bonuses, penalties, commitment of the European Union with its citizens, its companies, and the ability of the European Union to be influential in the digital future. So, thank you again to the Charles Wentworth Foundation. It's a pleasure to be in this very nice headquarters, far from the Madrid traffic. Thank you to all of you who make this day possible. Thank you to the embassies, because this was an idea of the embassies, the Commission, the government that supports think tanks, who work with great enthusiasm. And again, let me underscore the importance of this digital agenda for the future of Europe, beyond what may happen in Germany next Sunday or what may happen in other closer territories. And we should think that the future of Europe is at stake. We should continue to be present in an increasingly digital world. Thank you.
Gracias, Ignacio. Excusar.
I want to apologize for the absence of the director of the European Representation Office in Madrid, Arantzazu Beristain, who would have loved to be here. And I will now give the floor to Rasmus Lumi, Ambassador of Estonia, who will give us his point of view on all of these matters. And I think we should all become aware of the fact that we are located in different geographies. We're talking about a Baltic country, Estonia, and we're having this conversation in a Mediterranean country. Ambassador, during the Spanish transition, very much admired but very much criticized these days, during those transition years, we did something that was extremely difficult. We stopped being Mediterranean, passionate, etc., and we started to behave as if we were cold and Baltic countries. And it was a great decision, and I hope that that Baltic cold will again be a solution for all of us. And at the same time, on behalf of the Elcano Institute and the Charles Wentworth Foundation, we want to tell you that we're going to help you against the Soviet or the Russian bear.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for those very kind words. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I think to start, I have to say that my version of all of this is that there isn't much more to say, because I think everything that is important has already been said, everything that I was going to say myself. But it's a great pleasure to be here among the organizers of this event. And very briefly, I'm going to follow, since we have foreign speakers and participants, I'm going to speak in English.
I would now very briefly like to say a few words as also introductory remarks for the seminar, even though most of the things have already been said that I was also thinking about. But listening to my colleagues here, I started thinking that Estonia, for maybe close to 20 years, has had this worry that on the international scene that we are projected as a one-topic country, and that topic would be Russia, obviously, and therefore we have really put in strong efforts diplomatically and politically in order to be able to also project our interests and our contributions in all other fields. Now, thinking of the words we just heard here, I started thinking that maybe we haven't been very successful in getting rid of the one-topic country notion. Only the topic has changed. Now the topic is not Russia anymore, but digital. So which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I believe we have very good experiences and capacity in that, and obviously I fully agree that this is something that we should be focusing on, and something that Estonia does focus on, and exactly for that reason when we were putting together our EU presidency priorities, then we decided that one of our key priorities obviously has to be digital Europe. Very briefly about what or how I see the importance of digital Europe from two aspects. I think digital Europe may sound to many people hollow or distant or whatever, and then people may not very easily tend to grasp something that seems to be somewhere in the virtual space, or not really, you can't really grasp it. But at the same time, I believe that on a personal level, still, using technology, trying to understand technology, it is a little bit better or easier to understand what digitalization is all about. It's an entirely different thing when we start talking about the rules and regulations that do govern or should be governing digitalization. And this question is only within one country. I mean, we already have sometimes difficulty to understand what rules we have to follow and why they are as they are within one country. Therefore, I think it's even more of a challenge to try to make these rules work cross-border between different countries, between different European Union countries. But I think it's a challenge that is worth tackling, because as has been said, the prosperity and well-being of more than 500 million people actually also depends on it, and therefore we should be definitely continuing to work on it on the European level in order to ensure a better future for our citizens. And the second aspect of the digitalization is that in Europe we have been talking for a long time about the importance of the European Union on a global level, and as Ignacio already mentioned, I think this is a key point that in order to be a global player, as Europe or the European Union aspires to be, we have to embrace digitalization in a way that we have to be among the best, because in digitalization those who are left behind are left behind. And I don't necessarily see it as a fight between, as a fight or a contest or a race between different powers or different countries, rather than something extremely natural that comes on to the mankind, and we're just moving towards it. And if we don't grasp it, if we don't embrace it at the right time and in the right sense, then we are left behind. And this means that we're left behind technologically, culturally, probably mentally as well, and so on. Therefore, I believe that that digitalization and digital Europe should be part of the European Union priorities, not only Estonian EU priorities, and I hope that that everybody understands that the future is actually, so to speak, already here, and our job is to try to keep up with it. Entonces, con dicho esto, muchas gracias a todos.
Having said that, thank you so much, everyone, and I wish you a very interesting debate.
Bien, entonces.
Right, so I'd like to ask the people who are going to take the floor next in the next session, Linda Corujedo, Slim Sikut, and Victor Calvo Sotelo, the next three speakers. Could you please come up here? Ana Vos is going to be the moderator of this next session. Thank you so much.
Decirles que cuando.
When is it, Juan? When is it, please? Oh, yes, on the 27th and 28th, we have another seminar about Europe. You should not miss that seminar. It will be the 29th of a series dedicated to Central Europe. And we will later on give you more information about the seminar that is going to be held here next week. Thank you.
¿Ya? ¿Empezamos? Bueno, pues empezamos.
Okay, I think we can start now. We're a bit late already, so let me very briefly introduce the three speakers that we have in this panel session. I think in the program you have this information, but very briefly, let me just give you a few ideas of who they are. Linda Corruego Stenberg, who is Director of Political Strategy, if she belongs to the European Commission, she has a very long experience in the European Union. Next to her is Slim Sikut. I would say that he is the spokesperson of that virtual country, we could say, that Estonia is. And I'm sorry, Ambassador, because I am here doing the one-issue country again.
Afraid.
So he's Deputy Secretary General, Communications and Information Systems of the Ministry of Finance and Communications of Estonia, which, as you know, has the presidency right now of the Council. And next to him is Victor Calvo Sotelo, who is Head of New Technologies of the People's Party and former Secretary until last year, Secretary of State for Telecommunications and for the Information Society in Spain, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So in the previous presentation, we heard this sentence of Europe, will it be digital or not? And that very often this sounds like a very abstract concept, very difficult to grasp. But what is the European Union doing to really have a credible digital Europe, and so that we won't be lagging behind other countries like South Korea, Japan, or the United States? Ms. Stenneberg, please. Yes, thank you so much for your invitation. Yes, it is true that the digital has been, since very recently, has been it's something that now we think a lot about, but before it was considered as something very technical, something that was only for experts and that had no interest really for people in the street, for the laymen. But that has changed a lot, and now it is one of the priorities of the Juncker Commission, and that is why we have launched the digital market, the single digital market. We started with it in May of 2015, and we have launched 35 proposals and 21 proposals for legislation ever since. So it is a very ambitious program. But now we have the Estonia presidency, which is a very fabulous for us, because they are truly involved in making these things come true. So it's a great help for our policy, because it has to be specific. It has to be something that concerns people and not only be abstract concepts. So what are we doing more specifically? We've already made sure that data portability will become a reality. We can consider that already as a fact. There is roaming. Everyone who has gone on holidays in another European country haven't had to pay such a high bill as they used to in the past for roaming charges. That is no longer the case, no longer roaming charges. But we have many other proposals that we depend on other institutions like the Council of Ministers of the member countries and the European Parliament. They also have to get down to work. I'm not saying 24 hours, but they need to work many, many hours to make this come true in 2018, which is our target. And that's, around the corner. It's tomorrow. Time goes by very fast, and we will have a lot of things ready by next year. We have just presented 2 packages last week. We have the cybersecurity package. That is an issue that concerns everyone, because many people have had experiences of attacks, their accounts being attacked, and have read in the press of the 2 great attacks that we have suffered this year, also in Europe. And the volume of attacks from 2015 to 2016 has increased by 300%. So it's scary. That means that we're going to reinforce an agency that already exists, but we're going to reinforce it for security. It's a European cybersecurity agency. We're going also to strengthen cooperation between the national centers, because as some of you may perhaps know, there are hundreds of cybersecurity centers in every member country, but these must work better together, and that is also part of this proposal. There is a proposal on certification for products. There is also a master plan if there is a massive attack. if, well, we know that there will be massive attacks, so we need to get ready for that. And also research to help the member countries in order to get ready for the future. And of course, we're going to use the money we have in research programs that we already have in the European Union, and perhaps we will have to invest even more for the period after that, from 2021 onwards, where there will be another research program. We also made free data movement happen, but this is non-personal data though, and that's very important for you to take into account, because there's a mixture in the debate. We talk about data and we don't know very well whether these are private data or other types of data, but we're talking about other types of data for which there is free movement, and the important thing is the location of the data. And in this regard, there are initiatives in member countries to make location in their country mandatory. And we don't think that this is a good idea, though. Why don't we think that this is a good idea? Well, first of all, it isn't safer. It isn't more secure. The other way around. What is more secure is data that are in a big center with more security. And what guarantees security is the encryptions between the 2 points and where these keys are, not where the data physically are. And also, for companies, particularly for SMEs, it is important for there to be free movement of non-personal data. And also for large companies, it is important for SMEs and corporations. So there are many arguments in favor of it. And I also want to remind you that for private data, there is already a regulation that guarantees the privacy of data. And this regulation, moreover, is a model for other countries. We have contacts with the Japanese and other countries. And the truth is that this is a concept that has been very successful as well outside of Europe. So we'll see what happens with that. And thirdly, because I think that my time is running out, we're also going to look at the platforms more closely. We already did a public consultation, and there are some concerns, it seems, from companies and from people, from citizens. So we need to act upon that, but I leave that for later. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry, her microphone is off, but you've been very disciplined with the time. And let's hear from the different speakers, and then we'll have time for the audience to take the floor. So now it's Sim's turn. You said that Estonia is an agnostic country, I think you said, but you have one faith. I'm sorry, but her microphone is not working, so I think that's what she's saying. You believe in cybernetic society, and you're spreading the gospel all over the world, right? Of a digitized society. So I'm going to ask you to explain the example of Estonia in 6 minutes and the priorities of your country's presidency. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to fit into that time. But first, really thank you for the foundation for hosting this, and our own embassy here in Madrid and other partners. Well, the president of the foundation clearly said that there's quite a difference in geography, and coming from Thailand last night, so it is a change of geography. It's quite nice to be in a warm climate for a change. Well, some people suspect that was the reason why we started going digital in the first place, because you don't want to go out most of the time. So you need to get things done from a distance. Now, yes, in Estonia we've been doing things, trying to do things digitally in all fields of life for 20 years now. And we really started with one verse of single reason, to be efficient. Right? So as a small country, we really have to do all we can to really make most of the resources we have, right? The little population, the little natural resource, we have the taxes we raise. And we don't want to have taxes too high, for example. So the point is that, so we started with a bunch of experiments really down the line, and these worked, and these became a strategy that it is today. So whether in government, whether all fields of government, whether we talk, now having a very efficient tax administration, or health sector, or how our police runs with the help of digital tools, to then, yes, how our industries are developing, or now the very active startup scene. So we have really sort of, grasped and seen the benefits that digital can bring to the country's development, right? Even if you're a small one, it basically allows us to be, for example, bigger in that sort of sense. And I mean, I think I'm happy to speak about Estonian experience in a longer sort of term, in Q&A part. But I think clearly, let's say, what we have been after is seeing that, in many ways, it all revolves around data. Right? So making use of data, making use of sharing of data and access to the data. So to give you an example from the government side, right? So the reason why we have so many digital services for people and entrepreneurs, why they use them so much, is exactly because, with the help of data, we can make them easy to use. So to give you an example, so for example, taxes were one of the very first things we digitized back in the day. And the reason why people love to pay taxes in Estonia, funny enough, is that, look, it's such a simple affair, right? In less than 3 minutes, most people are done with the taxes because we represent data to you that actually you have presented us as a government throughout the year. We reuse that data. Or the same thing in health sector. When I go to, let's say, see my doctor, he or she will have access to a growing medical electronic health record that, again, hopefully should save me time and should save the health system a bit of time. And the same thing in companies and how they reuse data across the sectors. So my point is this, that we can talk about many examples, but clearly, yes, we've seen the value of digital. At the same time, well, Linda brought in the cyber issues, right, cyber security issues. We've also seen that these can be managed if we decide to manage them well. I mean, risks are there to be managed in the first place. So whether it's the cyber attacks, whether it's the issues of privacy, if we have the right sort of safeguards in place, legally speaking, good, strong framework like we do in Europe, if we work on this daily for having our defenses up, if we design our system safely, well, we can take care of most of the cyber security risks. And then collectively in Europe, then exactly worked on mitigating the remaining ones. So my point is this, that risks are not holding us back. Rather, there's something we have to work on because benefits are there to be had. And the benefits, I mentioned efficiency. It's not really just the efficiency for the government side. So it's not like a governmental business. Really what we have been after is that we see the benefits we bring to the whole of the economy. So to give you one example, that we have had a national digital identity for more than 15 years now. Every Estonian has an ID card in the pocket, or these days more and more also a mobile ID in the phone that allows me to access any service online, electronically, or also sign things digitally. The biggest use case of the signatures is not with the government, not the applications you send to the government, because most people do it only a very few times a year. Most biggest use case is business to business, business to customer. All the contracts we are doing in our daily lives as entrepreneurs or as customers of particular services, that's where the usage and that's where the benefits are. So basically, by working on digital means, also the government, we basically create an infrastructure for the country. We help the whole country to digitize. And so efficiencies are there really for the whole of economy. So for example, just one random figure in a way, but we estimate that we save in the whole economy at least about 2% of GDP each year, a work week per person each year, just by signing things digitally. And that's not within the government, that's in the whole of economy. So clearly, benefits are there to be had and more widely than just with the government. And so our thinking was very simple and has been very simple even before presidency. So as we've seen it work, and we've seen that risk can be managed, so we have been really trying to push also our colleagues on European level and in other member states to take the same path and really work to have digital Europe, like my ambassador said, that we would really exactly make the most of digital, not just in Estonia and some other pockets in Europe, but in the whole continent, really. And well, a few islands next to us as well. But and so when we went to presidency, it was really a no-brainer. Yes, because that has been our agenda anyway, to really then make the most of these 6 months now to get as much discussion going along these issues, get as much progress as we can through the presidency on these issues. Now, Linda had just very few minutes to go through what are the latest things on the table when it comes to digital single market and the packages there. But in a way, I think we've been very glad that Commission through the last years now, on the exactly Juncker's cabinet term time, has delivered a lot on digital single market. And exactly we also already have managed to agree a lot of things when it comes to that. Still lots to do as well. So in our presidency, we work, actually not just us, so we work very much in a trio setup. So trio means that us, the Bulgarians who will follow, and the Austrians, we have committed as a trio that exactly by end of 2018 we would get the agreements done on the remaining packages of the current digital single market strategy, and as the review also foresaw in spring this year. So basically, yeah, we are committed to delivering and making sure that the framework for making most of digital in Europe will be clearly there, and for exactly from the market point of view. And I think why we are so committed to this, one thing is really the benefits we've seen in our lives, daily lives really. But the other part is what one of the speakers said at the beginning here on the stage. So we have been very committed to the European project and the single market overall. And for us today, if we look practically, that unless we also make great advances on digital single market, well, the old one, or let's say the other freedoms really are not effective there as well. So to give you examples, so let's say if an entrepreneur goes to do business from Estonia to Madrid here, right, or even close to Finland next door to us, 80 kilometers away, there's so much paperwork and hassle involved in actually doing it. And we have a free movement of capital and goods and services and people, but there's so many barriers to actually effectively having that work, unless we also then complement it digitally. For example, that our governments would exchange data, because then it would be much easier for companies to move and much less bureaucracy involved in all of this. So we really see that yes, digital single market is the way to really keep the single market alive and kicking and go further. Now, as presidency, like I said, we're keen on delivering on the packages we have on the table. Our focuses are clearly on the ones that perhaps are some of the hardest struggles at, right? So whether it's the issues of electronic communications code that will hopefully set the stage really for strong investment into next generation connectivity networks in the next years to come. We hope to get very close to an agreement by the end of our presidency period. Whether it's the geo-blocking issues, whether it's the issues of, for example, e-privacy now, which is a complement to the data protection rules.
AVMSD.
Yeah, well, that as well, or let's say the whole copyright issue, let's put it this way. Or single digital gateway now, which is a very recent proposal on how to really, again, enable a single market to function, right? So, and the same thing, even though we already had a handful when we went into the presidency, we have not minded that new things end up on the table as well, like the things that Linda mentioned, the new cyber package or free flow of data initiative. So exactly, we'll do the most we can in 6 months to take them as far as we can, although there will be some for Bulgarians and Austrians left. But another point is that, but besides all the usual presidency work, because I mean all the presidencies, what we do is that we manage negotiations and trying to get agreements done between member states and then with the Commission and Parliament in the next stage. Besides all of that, what we really jumped and saw as an opportunity is to use the 6 months to really try to hopefully, if I can say, inspire, right? And start discussions about what's next. Because in a way, digital single market or even beyond the whole digital Europe will never be fully ready. Technology goes ahead, there's always more we can do. So we are trying to really sort of have a lot of discussions now 6 months' time about, okay, where are we going from here? What's really next beyond, let's say, the current digital single market strategy at hand? What else is there to tackle? So that is why we have some 50+ events around different digital themes in Thailand. So exactly, all the Spanish ministers also have many occasions to come to Thailand along with the colleagues from other countries. Just next week we will have a Thailand summit, a digital summit where the heads of state and government are convening to talk also what is the long-term view, how to make the most of digital in Europe. And the discussion, we are trying to really shift it to not just then having a legal framework so that we could do things, but also agreements and the plans, how will we make use of this framework in all different sectors. So be it health, be it transport, be it even agriculture, how do we then really make the most of digital in all these walks of life on a European level and together. And my last bit about this is, so let's say the connecting theme for us goes back to what I was saying before, let's say where we have seen the biggest benefits come from in Estonia, and it's data. So that is why, let's say, in all these different fields, like I said, we are trying to especially raise the issue, how do we get data flowing? And not just even physically, which is what the current sort of Commission proposal deals with, but also how can we make it this way that data can be used, accessible, reused, shared more between sectors, companies, governments. And again, whether it's agriculture, health, transport, space, you name it, doesn't matter. Because that's where we can reap the benefits as public sectors. That's where we also can create a space for data economy, the next innovations to flourish from in all these different economic sectors. So yes, free movement of data, as we have sort of dubbed it or called it, is really what is the overall theme for us. And Linda mentioned correctly that in a way we need to then see how to distinguish between data parts in that sense. We see that in many ways, when it comes to personal data, the framework actually is there. GDPR, we have to implement this rather. But we have to actually try to raise the issue, but okay, well, what concerns really the data that is not personal, right? Machine to machine, generated by companies, so forth. But let's also then agree what is the framework for this kind, because that what really will be used for example, for artificial intelligence business models, for the next data innovations, stuff like that. So actually, that is my last note. Yes, we remain committed because, first of all, perhaps we don't know any better. But it's really that exactly we've seen the benefits and we want all of Europe to share them.
Thank you very much. Una nota personal.
On a personal note, The Economist uses religious language, spreading the gospel, but we're all using paper. Only one of you is using a digital technology. As a person responsible for information society in the Spanish government, as I heard the previous speaker talk, I was thinking about the Spanish government. For example, the digital tax return is something we already have. I'm afraid of speaking with the microphone so close to my mouth, but anyways, what has Spain done, and what is it that we still need to do? What steps should we take to be part of that digital European Union? Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the Charles Van Wert Foundation for this miracle, for organizing this European events. And it's great that they had the idea of having this debate on digital Europe, inviting me to participate. The Commission has told us everything that has been done in this field. Estonia, its representative, spoke about those areas where Estonia has done a lot of work in digital terms. The ambassador said a while ago that they wanted to get rid of that idea or that image that Estonia is not a success story. No, Estonia has become a success story in digital affairs. The Vice President for Digital Affairs of the European Union is a former Minister of Estonia, and he's been one of the promoters of change. On a more personal note, I will speak in general now, and then I'll speak more specifically. The digital market is seen by most countries as one of the most pressing issues we need to do. And it's true that from a political point of view, Europe has had some issues. As de Gaulle said, first politics. Practical issues will come later, or logistics will come later. But yes, it's true that we want to take care of practical things, but then there's Brexit, etc. But I think there's a clear European will to move towards a single digital market. In fact, in the Commission, stronger commissioners were created. There was a first German commissioner, now a Bulgarian one, and a Vice President ANSI, who coordinates other countries. And I believe that the European progress that has been made in digital terms has been great. The legislative process in Europe is complicated. There are other issues that you need to take into account, and all of us citizens see this. For example, roaming. Everyone is now relieved because when they go to another country in the European Union, they won't get a very fat bill when they return. As Mario Monti said, this is a way that we have for the wine drinkers of the south to pay for the beer of people in the north. It's a cross subsidy between north and south, or south and north, but it creates a spirit of European cohesion, which is essential. Europe has done a lot of important things. For example, the right to oblivion, which is something that has emerged from the European courts of justice. There are many practical initiatives that have come from Europe. The European legislative process is complicated. It's complicated at the level of the Commission, then there's national governments, Parliament. Mr. Del Castillo will speak in the next panel. You know the importance of all of this. And then there's a whole process of transposition of directives to national laws. So in Europe, you have to work very hard and use a lot of intelligence to see which are the rules and laws that can be enforced in all countries. In Spain, what's the situation in Spain? Well, from a political point of view, fortunately, there's a great level of political consensus when it comes to technological issues. In the last legislature, we approved almost unanimously an act of Parliament which was very positive. So there's a certain agreement. There's not much controversy between political parties when it comes to technological issues. And I think we all agree that what we do, we have to do it at a European level. We really believe in the European digital market, so we have to do our best for that market to happen, and we have to act more in a more agile and more committed way. And we need to do it in Brussels. And that's what we've done in the last few years. Each country has its own nature and personality. The UK should have held the next presidency. The UK is usually a great promoter of SMEs. They've tried to make sure there isn't much regulation. This is a desire that is shared by many other countries. For example, Germany is concerned about privacy and data protection. France, because of its cultural exception and sovereignty issues, they also have their own ideas. And Spain, I believe, has played, in the last few years, a more mixed role. But I think we've always had a good conversation with other countries, and the government is always in line with our representatives in Brussels. The Spanish government proposes a solution, submits its paperwork on time. So with this national political consensus, we can play an active role in Brussels, and we should be able to promote all these proposals and initiatives. Linda was talking about the fact that we will talk about certain things after the break. Maybe those who are more involved in this discussion, who talk about the role of platforms in the new digital world. Europe in general, and Spain in particular, promotes the idea of having an intelligent regulation of this new world of platforms. President Obama, 2-3 years ago, accused Europe of regulating for the sake of protection of its own markets, because the European companies were not as successful as US ones. But apart from protectionist issues, As Miguel Angel Aguilar said, Europe is much more than a single digital market, much more than an economic power. It has other values that we need to transfer to the digital world. The issues that we put on the table in the digital world have to do with paying taxes, which is a very important thing to do, obligations of public service. There's a series of services that are now being rendered thanks to the digital technologies, which are provided by companies that used to have those obligations before. So I think the new incumbents or the new players need to have the same responsibilities and obligations. Users of the digital world also have our own obligations and our own rights. Sometimes you don't know who to complain to. So all of this must be regulated with a good framework that promotes users' rights. Also, property rights. A pioneer in copyrights and data protection is Europe. Europe was the first continent to create some legislation on data protection and the right to oblivion. And there are other countries, not just the US, but other countries in the world that have had a rather skeptical view of these things. Europe wants to put this on the table, and it wants to fulfill its obligations. And then there are new issues, for example, in the world of competition and the fact that some companies are the incumbents in the digital world. Well, the Commissioner for Competition is the one that has sanctioning power. Competition is one of the pillars of the Commission. We need to be able to manage competition in this digital world. And in Spain, answering the question that was asked, I believe we have a series of great advantages. We probably have the best infrastructure in telecommunications in Europe. The success in Spain is thanks to the fact that we have big companies that compete in Europe. But it's also due to the fact that for many years we've done the right thing. We have things that few countries in Europe could dream of. We have mobile telephony networks of high quality. We have good universities. We have very talented young people, very creative. And that makes me think that for Spain, a single digital market where there's free movement of people and workers. We have lots of tourists who are attracted to Spain, but we also have a digital offer that can attract investments, companies, and new things. We have to make an effort in digital transformation. We have to work with SMEs and small companies, but in general, Spain is very much in favor of the digital world because our future depends on it. Thank you very much. As we heard you speak, others were taking notes, but now it's time to react to what you've said. One of the things that was mentioned was the success of roaming, something that all Europeans now enjoy. Something that has to do with a new digital world. But it hasn't been easy. And if we believe what Vivian Redding says, it's been very difficult. There's been great opposition of governments who are very much under the pressure of telecom companies. So, following the end of roaming fees, and after what we've heard from Mrs. Redding, I would ask you, what difficulties do you see in the road ahead regarding the priorities that have been established, the projects and proposals that have been made? What are the main pitfalls and difficulties? Because we live in a continent and in a world where, again, there are protectionist movements. So to what extent will these protectionist movements affect the level of digitization? We should open up instead of closing our borders more and more. I believe it's true that it took 10 years to get free roaming in the European Union. It's incredible, but it's been 10 years. Before, evolution took place more slowly. Now, everything is moving much, much faster. And I think politicians are very much aware of the speed of change, and they realize that they have to work hard to get all this moving. So next year, we will have all the legislation we need already passed, and then we'll have to reflect it into national legislation, which will be the next step. But I believe that now there's more awareness that things are changing very fast and that we have to take this seriously. Secondly, I'd like to say that, yes, it's true that there are protectionistic movements, but there's also a strong desire in Europe for free exchange and free movement, because it's proven to be good for society and for the economy. It's true that there's always pressure from many sides, but I think Europe can show that there are many things we can do well. We need to create a free exchange area, the free single market. We have a treaty with Canada, and now we're negotiating with other countries like Japan. Negotiations will start also with other like-minded partners, and that's a way we have to export our idea of how things should work. And I also wanted to make a comment about what you said, the fact that the three of us were using paper and Sim was using technology. Well, in my case, I must say that it's because of my age. I'm used to working with paper and pen, but in parallel, I also use all the digital gadgets. So for me, it's a parallel thing. So I believe that we should not lose hope that younger people like Sim will use technology more and more. My daughter, for example, is very skillful with technology, but she prefers to read books on paper. And she belongs to an even younger generation to yours. So that means there's plurality. I don't like the fact that people should all think the same, or the idea that everyone should have the same ideas.
Using paper. No, actually no, but okay. On a more serious note, so I think the biggest challenge is, as it is always is and will be, is basically first of all to have a pragmatic mind, and secondly to be bold in decision making, right? And I'll explain what I mean. So, by pragmatic mind is that yes, I mean I can quite understand the sort of tendency, whether globally or within some European countries, to perhaps try to move and try to protect some of the immediate of interest, even the longer term view and gains would be even bigger perhaps, right, if you pragmatically think and look at them, right? And I think this is partially the issue of roaming, right? At the end of the day, I mean, look, it sort of, took this time to get to this realization. The trouble with the pragmatic mind is that, of course, yeah, we all know this, the political sort of horizons are different than perhaps sort of, when the sort of impacts come in. But that's why I say it's a challenge, right, for us. And what will help, I mean, what we hope helps is really to have a very keen mind what is happening globally. And I don't mean in terms of protectionism, in terms of competition and healthy competition, right? So, to give example, when heads of state and government will be in Tallinn next week, Our aim is really, let's say, to then sort of, scope the discussion, saying, look, we have to see what is happening around Europe, how different regions are going ahead faster when it comes to data economy, connectivity, you name this. So it's really like the choice of, exactly, are we in the game or are we not? And if we agree that we should be, then, at least to our view, pragmatically, that sort of, consequences for decisions will follow. But what sort of decisions we have to take, right? Whether on roaming or other issues. So that's one part, but boldness, and that's a bit trickier. So what we have benefited perhaps the most as Estonia, as now one member state, is that our luck has been that leadership, political and administrative, I have to say both, right? Have not been afraid to try things out. Even if we don't have all the perfect answers, even if we don't have the perfect model for how the policy will work, we're happy to at least take the risk and see whether it will have effect. If not, you can always kill it off and start the next thing. If it works well, we can scale. And I think this sort of risk appetite and sort of readiness to sort of try things and experiment, even if on the side at first, is what needs to be more there, right? Because again, that's one way really to try to basically get beyond legacies, get beyond the sort of whatever sort of locked-in debates we have. Because if we have evidence that something works, perhaps these things are a bit easier to then win these sort of arguments.
Ponías el ejemplo del roaming.
You spoke about the example of roaming. BEREC did a very interesting study comparing the use of roaming in all countries of the Union. And there are huge differences in terms of prices, in terms of use of roaming, how much people travel. And suddenly, the solution was one size fits all. And here the Commission is regulating retail prices. Usually you regulate wholesale prices. Now the Commission is telling companies how much they should charge each individual customer. I don't know. I guess that in Luxembourg, with 30 antennas, you have no problem. In Spain, you need 30,000. There are many cities in Europe that have 3,000 people in November and 60,000 in August. I think the concept is to understand the great diversity we have in Europe. And in all those matters that we need to solve, we need to know what's the situation of each country from a cultural point of view, from a data point of view, from a copyright point of view, protection of consumers. So I think that's the reason why it's a difficult process, but it's important, it's pressing to do something about it, and I think we're moving in the right direction. But it's difficult, really, to find a solution the type of one-size-fits-all in a single European legislation. Could you be more specific about those pitfalls and obstacles, those differences in Europe? You mentioned 30 antennas in Luxembourg and 30,000 in Spain. Could you give us a few more examples, more specific examples of those pitfalls we have in Europe when it comes to reaching an agreement to make Europe a bit more digital than it is today? Are those pitfalls posed by governments? Are they pitfalls posed by telecommunication companies? Pitfalls or obstacles posed by consumers or technological ones? They're not technological. Most of the pitfalls of the obstacles are not technological. Lately, we've been talking about doing something with platforms because some member countries are already thinking, they're proposing national legislation. And if that should happen, if those national laws were passed, we will not have a single digital market for Europe. So that is why we're thinking about the relationship between companies and platforms. That's the scope of our ambition. And many different issues have come up when we did a public consultation. For example, there's small companies, there's discrimination between companies, there's a lack of transparency when it comes to the principles that are used to generate platforms. There are problems in accessing data And that has to do with what I mentioned before about free movement of data. And there's a lack of effective repair mechanisms when a mistake is made. So that is why we have to look at these things very closely. But we're also in favor of businesses and innovation. So we don't want a heavy burden. We don't want to make a proposal that is a heavy burden for businesses. And there's also competition elements. Victor mentioned this. DG competition has a lot to say about e-commerce. So there are many instruments that can be used. But yes, it's true that there are very different rules in different member countries, and that's a problem for the single digital market.
I have just issues of legislation, and where we already sometimes have 20 different frameworks that we have to somehow harmonize. I think overall, if you think of what is in essence digitization, right? It's not that somehow we just play with technology. We really try to reform or redesign how we work with the help of technology, whether as a public sector, as a company, as our own families, right? And so this is really where the sort of, if you ask for the pitfalls, and the challenge really is that willingness to change is not equally the same in different sectors, different players or actors in different countries for that matter then, right? So, and that's what I mean. So I'm often asked, let's say, okay, for example, you in Estonia, okay, so it was so easy for you to do things because you're small. Well, yes and no. In many ways, countries are equal in size because of the functions we effectively carry out, right? The services we provide, the numbers of things we do, right? The difference is the lines in the database, and that it's defined by population size, right? And the other difference is the willingness to change, how fast you can get to decisions, how fast you're able to implement and sort of see them through, right? And so my point is really this, that exactly it's this, habits or us being used to doing things in certain ways and not willing to change is what is the biggest challenge and trick. And that leads back to what I was saying before. So if there is not this sort of willingness to change, then exactly pragmatism and boldness is also not there, of course.
Yeah, I agree.
Yo creo que hay una dificultad.
I think there is a great difficulty, which is the speed at which digital and technological change happens. So for a while, at the beginning of some technological change, you don't even know what to legislate. So that's why the Commission is so prudent. We talk about platforms. Different countries are experimenting. The Commission follows those experiments. And when the time comes, they decide that those platforms have been tested well enough as to choose one option. But I think the Commission has to follow some principles, has to set priorities in digitization, open new markets. But when you have to pass a new legislation, like in roaming, it's a very specific legislation that sets prices for private companies, and that has a great impact on the audiovisual world. Vice President Tansey did a lot of work on geo-blocking, the fact that I can take my content with me when I go abroad. But obviously that also affects the way those audiovisual contents are sold in other countries. So everything has its consequences. It's very difficult to regulate on all these things because of the speed of change and all the things that are affected by this change. And it takes time, but at the end of the day, we converge. There's some discrepancy in the sense that some countries are more interventionistic, others are more laissez-faire. So we have to strike a balance between the two. In all areas, in privacy, in confidentiality, there's always tension when it comes to deciding what is the right balance. How much can we regulate without de-incentivizing the use of that technology? So that is why I say that it's a complicated process.
Estaba viendo algo que...
I think all journalists know that this content, we always find this content is not available in your country. Is that can we do away with that? We see it all the time. Yes, the Herbrucking dossier is on the table. It is one of the most complicated matters, but the presidency is working extremely well along those lines, and we have the hope that we can solve that by the end of the year. But, well, we'll see. We'll see, because I think it is something that everyone has had that experience. This content is not available in your country. We know what it feels like. And the Vice President is really serious about this. I think there are many hopes that this will happen.
Brussels. No, but I mean, I can just repeat what Linda said. So exactly as it is on our table, we're trying our best in this sense, and I see no reason why it couldn't be, there soon enough, right? And in many ways, what is also at play here is that I'm optimistic also from, let's say, the content platform side at least, right? Because they would ideally like to have a bigger market, of course, right? And at the end of the day, if we strike a right to balance, exactly also, let's say, the producers, the authors, again, they can reach a wider audience. But exactly, the devil is always in a bit of details, but the goal at the end of the day should benefit all.
Yeah.
El geobloqueo, yo creo que muchos pensamos en...
Many of us think about content platform when you try to watch a video, and this happens, yes. But it's, as Linda said, in the physical world, this happens too. We cannot send you this parcel to your country. We don't ship to your country. Yes, we only ship to this or that country. Would you like to add anything, or should we give the floor to the audience? All right, so let's give the floor to the audience.
Como siempre, limiten sus exposiciones y vayan lo más directos posible.
Please be as brief as possible so that we can take as many remarks and questions as possible. He has to wait for the microphone. Yes, he has to start. Yes, the first thing that I wanted to say, and this is for Victor, and I thought about this question when Slim was saying that we have to save bureaucracy and paper. The digital system that we lawyers have in Spain doesn't work. It really is not good, and then we go to court, and it's like we were in the 19th century. And for Linda, talking about roaming, Anna Bosch, the moderator, suggested that it took 10 years to do this because of the pressure of lobbyists. I was quoting the commissioner who said that. Well, my question is for Linda. What is the pressure of the lobbies, and why are you pressured by the lobbies? Because the EU is the #1 economy in the world. You represent 18 states. And as the competition commissioner has proven, they just find a huge multinational. So why are you pressured by the lobbies? Yes, that's clear. Second question, or is that the third question, I should say? Good morning. Good morning. My name is Carlos Puente. I am a retired civil servant of the EU, so I can speak freely from the point of view of the consumer and the citizen. And I'm very grateful for your words. First of all, when the European Commission speaks about legislating, sometimes I'm afraid when I hear this, and I would like to know if this single digital market is a continuation of the digital agenda that was approved some time ago. And number two, I'm on the side of consumers now because I am a member of a well-known consumers association, but we must defend the consumer. The problem of the consumer is that he is defenseless of the guarantees offered by the EU and the different countries. It is not true that the justification has to be that the cost of having 30,000 dishes or antennas. I live in Vienna and I go to Budapest a lot, and I have to carry with me 3 cards. 3 cards to put into my cellular or mobile phone. In the US, as you know, there are 3 operators. The providers who transmit and have antennas from San Francisco to Florida and New York. And the cost is the same, exactly the same. So I don't share your opinion. I hope that you can clarify this. And finally, for Mr. Sikut, I'd like to say that yes, fine, efficiency is important, certainly, and that the advantages are not only for the state, that companies can also profit from all of this. But I'm afraid because my American friend could spy me from Virginia. So I am afraid that my data can be checked, controlled, and stored by someone I don't even know. I just came back from the Navarre University. I participated in a meeting there where we had the military who were talking about this. I'm not an expert on this. I was head of negotiations with European and Central European countries. But I'd like you to respond, please, to these issues because I think it's important for the consumer. I recommend my article published in August that is called Open Letter to the President Juncker who talks about this. Okay, fine, so let's take them by order with the 3 or 4 questions that we've heard. So Victor, would you like to start? Yes, about the judicial system in Spain. Well, yes, it's not a success story, I have to say. We have a lot of success stories in Spain. Slim before was talking about the world of taxes. Well, in Spain, I think the main providers of public digital services, the tax authorities are doing very well. In healthcare, we've made a lot of progress too. But Slim was saying the problems are problems that affect everyone, small or big. And the government, what we're doing is to put pressure on the judicial system so that at the end we can do away with so much paper in our courts. But it's a very complex thing to do. And we know the problems there are. But on many other aspects, though, the Spanish administration or the local administrations, for example, smart cities, that they've made a lot of progress. Spanish public administrations, I think, are at a very good level. The rankings done by Europe on open data, on the ability to do things online with the administration, were above the average. Not in the use by citizens. Citizens are using them, but more citizens could use them. Not too many are so far. With regards to what Carlos Puente said, defense of the consumer. Well, this is one of the things that Europe is putting on the table, in fact. There's also a different problem. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, the main lawyer of Google came here, and they said, well, people give us everything. They give us all their data. I don't know if they will be sorry for that in the future, but today they're giving us all their data. So people adopt products, applications, and services. Nobody reads the small print that you need to accept at the beginning of doing anything. A small company put in the print, do you accept your children turning into our slaves? And people accept it because they don't read what it says. So they think, well, I know that they won't defend my rights, but I want it. And Europe is saying that is not enough. And I think Europe is putting pressure on these world operators in the digital world. In the specific case of roaming, it's not so much a problem of lobbies and pressures and interests. It's that it's not easy. And you gave the example of the United States. Well, what happens in the States? There are 3 national operators, you say, or 3 carriers. Well, there's more competition in Europe between telecoms than in the U.S. And so those subsidies that were going to give to wine or beer drinkers, what they lose in one state, they win in another. In state, we don't have, in Europe, we don't have those global operators that can assume in their P&L an asymmetric situation. That's where we're heading. That's why we need to include some clauses on reasonable use, because the associated costs are not the same. But not only that, not even the mechanisms or companies are the same. But the Commission has been very brave. They're saying, don't tell me your problem. You have to accept it. And we've all accepted it. And we reached an agreement, and I think it's a good agreement. Yes, that mentioned two pressures that was addressed directly to you, the pressure of the lobbies. Well, itinerance. I have used the word roaming, which is used here, but there is a word in Spanish which is itinerancia, and my husband will scold me if he knows that I haven't used the right word in Spanish. No, it's not a matter of pressures from the lobbyists. Of course we talk to the lobbyists as everybody else, but that's not the reason why it took so long. Not at all. I have no doubt about it. That was not the problem. The thing is that, as Victor was saying earlier, it's been very difficult because prices are very different in the member countries. The systems are different. The technical level is different. And we also have the issue of beer and wine drinkers. In the summer, we all come to the south, to southern countries, so it was a matter of capacity in the networks, not only in Spain, but also in Italy and Greece. Just to give you a few examples where there is a lot of tourism from Northern Europe. And obviously, companies needed time to adapt. So it has been a gradual process because we started by imposing caps, limits, yes. And then, and this summer, finally, we had roaming all over. And that's why it took so long, because they needed to adapt. And then the other question about the digital agenda. Well, agenda is much lighter. Here we're talking about creating an internal digital market, which is much more ambitious. And we're lagging behind other parts of the single market. For physical products, we're already there. For the mobility of people, we've achieved that also. In terms of the mobility or free movement of services, perhaps not that much, but we've made more progress. That is our ambition. So I hope I won't bore you too much, but I am going to say what has already been presented, and I'm going to do it in English because that way it's going to be easier, because I have it in English. And I'm only going to mention the initiatives carried out by the GD where I work. Then there are more. There are 35 DGs. Well, as I said at the beginning, there are 35 of these. So we have geo-blocking.
Copyright directive, copyright regulation, including satellite cable, Marrakesh Treaty, that's it's for people with for instance, blind people, how they get access, etc. BEREC regulation, European Electronic Communication Code, Wi-Fi for EU, I mentioned that before, towards a gigabit society, and that's about connectivity targets. 5G action plan, so that's the new standard, as you know. E-privacy, cybersecurity, digitalizing European industry, e-government, standardization and interoperability, and that's ICT standardization priorities, digital skills, European Cloud Initiative, and so that's the European Open Science Cloud, And then I haven't had time to talk about that, but that's the high performance computing, where we need to invest quite a substantial amount of money for Europe to be at the level of the US, who are the leaders, but also Japan and China are very, very advanced. And this will need investments not only from the European budget that is comparatively small, compared to some national budgets, because we only get 1% of the GDP, the collective GDP of Europe. And here we need also private capital, and we need capital from the member states. But in order to really be part of the digital economy, we need the high performance computing. This will be necessary for connected cars. It will be necessary for e-health, etc. Bueno, muchas gracias.
But just to continue on Linda's point, just offering my personal view, right? Not working for the Commission, but I mean, obviously DSM, Digital Single Market Strategy, builds from what digital agenda was focused on in many aspects. But I mean, exactly like you brought out, I mean, it goes way beyond integrating exactly market conditions, beyond just what core digital initiatives might be, right? And that's what, for example, as Estonia, we've always valued, because I mean, ultimately we want to have a fair playground in all aspects. Now, the question about the risks, actually, from the audience here, you brought up a very good point, because, and that's what I was hinting to in my speech myself. So the risk we have to manage, right? But we see that they can be managed. For example, you brought up the risk of privacy loss and so forth. And I mean, just even simplest things. That is why we see that actually technology itself can offer quite a lot of answers. For example, that is why Estonia very strongly, as presidency, or even without it, right, we always said encryption has to be there. No backdoors whatsoever, right? And I mean, constantly evolving the encryption to also offer privacy, for example. That is why we believe a lot that actually transparency can help. And to give you a context from Estonian case, so that in our case, I can see who accesses my data that my government holds about me. I have effective control and oversight what happens to my data. So so basically exactly a way to control the big brother a bit. To all the way then exactly having the European framework about, let's say, what are really the sort of rights and conditions and how data can be used, accessed, so forth. You mentioned the terms and conditions, right, in the sort of user agreements, right? I mean, if you actually look at them, they have changed a lot, and actually I see that as a success of European policy. I mean, I get asked every now and often again, and actually in very much concise and brief overview, do I agree, do I understand what is it I'm doing in Google or other sort of services? To me, that's a sign that what we do is really working for the improvement of things. So basically what I'm trying to say, from legal framework to how we use technology actually to ensure this protection of our privacy and security, to, yes, I mean, having more transparency, this all can actually help to mitigate the problem as we see it in practice. In Estonian case, these things are enough for people to trust the system and to trust us with data, because at the same time, the other end, let's not forget, they get the benefit. If they didn't get the benefits, they wouldn't go for the services. And if the safeguards are there, well, they're happy to go for the benefits.
It's worth the risk.
It's worth the risk, basically, if you mitigate it right. But I have to make one very last point, and sorry, I mean, just to pick on this. I think we also have to be clear on one more thing in these sort of debates, and this is not personal now, but in the big picture risk scenarios, America is not our biggest enemy in this game. Organized crime, other state actors, these are much more bigger issues of threat in terms of security and the risk we have to manage than the issue you brought out. Although that's not to say we also don't have to deal with what you said.
Let's see if we have a few more questions. Can I ask my question in English? Yes, of course.
For Linda, because you've mentioned digital skills. So Commissioner for Justice Vera Jourova said last month that we wanted to set the global standards, which Politico then reported as wanting to be the world's digital policeman. Okay, and then we have a competition commissioner, Vestager, also taking down tech giants. So I work in an IT staffing and education company, and my insight is that we have a massive talent shortage in IT. Okay, so if we want to be setting the standards, can we do it without IT experts? Can we separate the politics? So I'm not being insolent, I'm really asking, could we keep on doing what we've been doing for the past 15 years through competition, regulation, set the standards, or do we really, really need to boost our IT skills in Europe? Thank you.
Mi pregunta va...
Yes, my question is for Slim. I think it is really a pleasure having you.
What are the priorities, and where are you working with the rest of the presidency, the member states that are coming to the presidency? Which are those, 6, and on which issues are you working, apart from the current issues that you have on the table?
Linda first, and then...
Bueno, sobre skill.
Okay, regarding these skills, I don't think it's either one thing or the other. We need to work on both things. And that is why we are working in that in my DG. Because we know that's really important. There are statistics that say that in 2 years, we will need 800,000 people who have this knowledge and skills in the digital arena. That's almost 1 million people that we will be needing in European countries to do the digital work of several types of jobs, not only engineers, but mainly engineers, IT engineers. So that's a problem. And for us, it is difficult because we don't have competence, in education policy. That's a national competence. But we're working a lot with the member countries to encourage them to include in their schools digital courses. We organize a co-week. In a couple of weeks, we will have the next one. It started like a very small project. I was there at the beginning. That was a few years ago, only 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's done all over the world. There are thousands and thousands of people who are participating. But that's another thing that I think is very useful to go in that direction. And we're making sure that not only boys but girls do it, because there is a lack of balance between the genders in the digital world, and we need to work on that too. So yes, we need to work a lot on that, and that is one of our priorities in the single digital market.
Briefly continue, I mean, I see it exactly the same as the way, right? We have to work on both sort of ends, especially as whatever we do on the skilling side, except perhaps immigration, is long-term game, right? So if we have also, let's say, short-term things, for example, in shorter-term things we can solve through a legal framework, I mean, we have to do them as well, right? Just not one or the other. But clearly, expertise or skills gaps is the biggest sort of challenge going ahead. And again, taking a member state point of view, our number one issue is people. We have way more ideas than people to do them with, right? So, and that really is effectively the barrier, not any other sort of impacts. Okay, the question about presidency and the priorities, I think in a way I was trying to highlight them, but briefly to then repeat. For us as Estonia and also our trio colleagues, Bulgaria and Austria, I mean, we haven't in that way really prioritized within the digital single market strategy. We want to deliver the whole thing as it is on the table right now, and still a few things coming, right? So, I mean, because clearly this is the end, and also the Commission's term, or the Parliament's term, we want to be done with the whole of it. When you just zoom in into Estonia as the first leg of this trio, right, then for us the key things, some of them are really what I brought out. Electronic communications code, yes, the copyright issues with the audiovisual part, geo-blocking, I mean, so forth. But that's one part. I will stress two other things that I perhaps didn't focus on too much. The other part really for us is cybersecurity, right? And exactly for the point of view that we now have a new cyber package on the table freshly, but also because we see there's a lot on a practical collaboration level we can actually help to boost as a presidency country. We have been doing a lot of work now in different cooperation groups and formations to really raise the issue to highest level of understanding in capitals. For example, we had the tabletop exercise to practice how do we solve an incident with defense ministers and then also with foreign ministers, right? Basically to be more ready if something should be happening, right? So it's not just the legislative part, really the practical work we try to advance. And the last bit is, like I was saying before, our horizontal theme is get the data to be more accessible, reusable, to flow more freely. And again, this is the discussion we're having sector by sector. We still, in the next 3 months, have numerous events and discussions about this in Tallinn and Brussels. And I mean, just to bring out one of them, in 2 weeks, there will be all ministers responsible for e-government in Tallinn to agree on, let's say, what do we do in member states, committing ourselves domestically, but also together on a European level to really sort of, advance digital services and access, let's say, exchange of data between the countries like that. So the legislative package in its whole, the cybersecurity part has been a special focus, and then the free movement of data issues, especially e-government sort of collaboration in there. Yeah.
Tenemos tiempo para una última.
We have time for one last question. Yes, very briefly, as Linda said, the problem of education and training is a national competence. The Commission does give incentives and provides funds, and as I answered your first question, we need to do more in Spain, and one of those things is training. In school, we have a very important program to put fiber optics in the school, but then you need to see what you transmit through that fiber. So no country, I think, in the world is doing this well enough. Children still use books, and they need to be more digital. We need to do more on vocational training and at university level too. We had a white paper that we published some years ago, and to work on that. And there is more activity in private education institutions than in public ones, but we're working on it. And the white paper allows you to see what the sectors are asking for and what we're able to give them. And then there's a very complex chapter, which is training on the job. All these things are important. And the countries that are responsible for education, we need to make a greater effort, I think. At the back of the room, just to move all over, just to move geographically and, unblock geographically. Yes, Europe, with regards to digital migration and terrestrial digital TV, what guarantees, what legal certainty is there going to be for operators? We've had a recent migration that we need to make important investments, and I'd like to know what measures are going to be adopted to guarantee that investment, the return on that investment. And from the point of view of television consumers, the new SIM 700 band, is that enough to guarantee interactivity? The TDT, they said it was going to be interactive, training, education used for healthcare, but now that hasn't happened because of the multiplicity of frequencies. Is that going to be possible in the future? Can you answer in 5 minutes? I think that question was addressed to me, right? We're talking about the second digital dividend. The first dividend is the one that we all suffered 2 or 3 years ago when we had to change. $10 million in Spain, the installations of our satellite dishes or antennas. And we already told the industry there's going to be a second dividend. We told the industry the 800 megahertz band was removed, and now comes the 700 megahertz. Why is this done? Because the frequencies, which are a scarce resource, have much more valuable financial and the social value as well. In the world of digital applications that can be done on telephony, the 5G when it comes, and therefore TVs have to compress in a smaller spectrum. What did we do? I was at the ministry then. The planning of frequencies that we did for the first digital dividend already took into account that there was a second dividend coming. So we didn't program any frequency in 700. But even so, all current television channels, when the second process comes along, now the way they are, they would not fit in what is going to be left. They're going to fit because there's a new technology pending that will allow to broadcast in a more compressed manner. Minister Nadal approved 2 or 3 weeks ago in Santander that Spain won't be the first country to apply that dividend. This is an obligation that comes from Europe. And what we are working on in the government is for that process to be done with the guarantees that you were talking about, and also trying to pay part of the cost associated to that. We asked Europe for permission, and Europe said that these aids could not be given. And now we're looking for other mechanisms for the second dividend. Okay, time flies. This is one of the first things you said that Linda said. Okay, it's at 12 o'clock. I'm very grateful for the discipline of the 3 speakers. Thank you so much for sticking to your allotted time to facilitate our conversations, our debate with our audience. We have a half an hour break, and then we'll start the second session, which I'm sure will refer to things that were said in the first session. The second one is about the single digital market. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in half an hour.
Perdona, se sirve un café arriba en el patio.
Coffee will be served upstairs in the
Microphone, please. Microphone, please.
Es útil su creación en un contexto tan complicado como el proceso de integración. Como decía, al cerrar la mesa anterior, todo esto se ha apuntado en la primera mesa, con lo cual imagino que quienes estaban aquí en la primera parte tienen algunas ideas que retomar de la primera mesa. Como ponentes están Francisco de Andrés, por parte del
Andrés.
Ay, perdona, disculpa.
No pasa nada.
Disculpa. Hay tantos de Andrés, lo siento. Francisco Andrés, del Real Instituto.
Microphone, please. The speaker is not using the microphone, or at least the microphone isn't on.
Para quien no tenga actualizado su currículum, hoy está aquí en calidad de presidente de la Asociación de Telecomunicaciones Digital, con lo cual me aventuro a decir que tenemos un teórico y dos prácticos, así, vale. haciendo reduccionismo. Dos apuntes de la página web de la Comisión Europea. Ha llegado el momento de lograr la adaptación del mercado. Sorry. Decía.
I was saying something that I read in the website of the European Union. The time has come to adapt the European Union to the digital era, dismantling the walls and the obstacles that prevent us from having a single digital market. This could contribute billions of euros and create hundreds of thousands of jobs. And in the last State of the Union presentation, someone said that the fundamental factor for data economy to double its value lies in the location of data. So from there on, I'll give you the floor. First, Francisco Andrés from the Institute Elcano. I'd like to thank the foundation. You have a few minutes each and then an open discussion. I'd like to thank the foundation for inviting me. I am really happy to be able to talk about European affairs. I'm not an expert in the digital market, but I've always been interested in these matters. Now we're living historical moments for humankind. Technological disruption, very fast changes, so it's very difficult to make forecasts. And there's great uncertainty around us. And sometimes we citizens are not aware of this, the media nor politicians. Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate of economics, who writes for the New York Times, said in 1998, the impact of internet on the world economy will be maybe slightly smaller than a fax machine, or similar to the impact of the fax machine. This gives us an idea that, well, and this also has a great impact on the different players in the market. The different players, they don't know what challenge they're facing. So any human reaction is to either do things as you always have and try to maintain the status quo, and this is a dilemma that we Europeans face, or else I invent and innovate and take risks and start doing things in a radically different way. And then there's the intermediate solution, which is doing a bit of each. Since we have experts in markets with us today, I'd like to talk from a different viewpoint. The European Union in 2015, 25 years later than internet was invented, and by the way, it was invented in Europe at the CERN. It launched the initiative of the single digital market for political reasons. We've gone through a very difficult period now with Brexit, with Trump, with the refugee crisis. So Europe needed a leitmotif, something that could bring cohesion to the Union. But secondly, there's been a structural challenge. We're now at a time with big data, with the Internet of Things, with computation in the cloud, with the acceleration of data storage and many other things, that we've gone through the first threshold of technological revolution. And this first threshold has a lot to do with scale. Until now, we've been able to share things, we've exchanged data, but not at the scale at which we're going to be able to do it from now on. And the digital revolution is going to affect sectors and industries that are key for our economy and our society. For example, the new industrial revolution, which is to turn industry into a service provider through data. General Electric, which was one of the big companies, it started with the Industrial Revolution, a giant, now is basically a data company. So that's the first conversion of a big company which has a business model that no longer consists on providing power to the users, but to trade with data. I recently attended a forum on big data, and the person in charge of data in Renfe, in the Spanish railroad company, told us, well, my desire is that in the future, people will be able to travel free of charge on the high-speed train, and they will only pay for the services they use on the train. So that's one aspect, technology, at which Europe is very good and not so good. It's very good in terms of scientific production, but it's not so good at creating added value. Another example, 2G and mobile technology is a European thing, a European invention. We adopted it at the European Commission very soon. And those who benefited from 2G, 3G, and 4G have been other players which are not Europe. 40% of data flows on private networks, and the exchange of data between Europe and the US is approximately, we provide data to the US and we get applications in exchange. 54% of the applications that we use in Europe have been developed in Silicon Valley, and only 24% of those developed in Europe are used by Americans. So there are huge asymmetries in the way we Europeans adopt technologies, generate value, and create market. In Europe, only 7% of the companies that operate on the internet have cross-border services. So we have the Maxwell equations, which are universal, mobile technology, but once those waves are transferred, they acquire a nationality. So we have a European level regulation, but when it comes to implementing and developing economies, we have national fragmented markets. We have this problem in decentralized countries where there are even administrative barriers at a regional scale. So the challenge is how to jump on the bandwagon of technological revolution, 4.0 revolution, big data, etc. And depending on how we Europeans are able to adapt our rules, preserving our models at the same time, we'll be able to jump on the bandwagon or we will miss it. There's something else I wanted to talk about, which is something that has to do with citizens. We are users, we are consumers, we are clients, and it's very difficult for citizens to get involved in a market. A market is a meeting point between producers and buyers, unless there's security, unless there's trust. And it's a challenge for companies, it's a challenge for public authorities, but it's also a challenge for us. In Europe, 37% of Europeans are illiterate in digital terms, people who are not able to go to the internet or even answer an email. So there's a long way to go in that sense. And one of the consequences, when I was preparing this lecture, I thought of other attempts that have been made in Europe to develop single markets. I remember when I used to work in research, I remember the energy single market, where there have been 4 waves of regulation, one after the other. But finally, we don't have an energy single market. My question is, will the same thing happen with a digital single market? The truth is, selling potatoes is not the same as selling gas or power, as it's not the same as exchanging information. It's a market that is more than a market. It's a market that generates new rights that can also go against some acquired rights. It's something that is going to change the political relationship between people and governments. We have Trump communicating on Twitter without having a chief of cabinet or going through the media. So this structural massive change requires that we stop and think, not only from an economic and technological point of view, but also from a philosophical point of view. And to conclude, tell me when I'm done, when my time is over. The last point I wanted to talk about is opportunities. Sometimes we see this as a challenge, as a threat. My daughter tells me I'm old. She tells me over and over again that I'm old. People who are of a certain age, well, it's more difficult for us to change and leave our comfort zone. But I think we should think about expanding our comfort zone. And I see there's a great opportunity with the welfare state. The public sector, the welfare state, has a huge opportunity to provide services, new services to its citizens through technologies that are more efficient, more transparent, more simple, etc. We have the issue of rural development, areas where we can apply the elements of technology, if we do it in a smart and inclusive way, if we do it in a participative way, so that people will benefit from technology. Because the promise of technology is a better life. But sometimes technology is not a step forward. I'll end with a joke. It's like going to bed with Alistair rather than with your partner. So technology is not always the answer. Gabriel Lopez, how do you see the steps that have already been taken and those that are projected from the point of view of the industry as a representative of Microsoft? Thank you for your question, Anna, and thank you to the Foundation for inviting me. And now, going back to the question and what Francisco just said, and let me quote what the website of the Commission says about the single digital market. It's an attempt to eliminate barriers to unleash online opportunities. I'd like to focus my presentation on our view of what all of this means from a technological point of view. What you said about how the opportunities of infrastructure are being taken advantage of, I found it very interesting. Mr. Calvo-Sotelo said that in terms of infrastructure, we're fine. There may be people who agree, others who do not agree, but in general terms, Europe is very well in terms of infrastructure, particularly Spain. But the question is, what is that infrastructure being used for? Recently, we spoke about what's more important, to have data centers in a country or for those data centers to be full of applications developed in Europe. Well, I think the value lies from an economic point of view. The important thing is to take advantage of those infrastructures rather than having them. But there are 4 pillars that I'd like to talk about. When we analyze how digital transformation is happening in a region, we see it from this 4 pillars point of view. The first one, privacy. The second one, security. The third one, transparency. And the fourth one, inclusiveness. When we analyze the European market, the European standard is a world standard. Ever since the regulation came out, well, we have decided that a large group of has decided to make sure that by next year we will comply with the regulation. And not only that, we will support our customers for them to be able to do this. But Microsoft is a company that can afford this type of investments because it clearly sees the value of it, not only in Europe, but it's very important for the rest of the world to establish a world standard on the right to privacy. But once again, from the point of view of the single digital market, we have a lot of regulation underway, as the Commissioner just told us, which sometimes may come into conflict or may generate uncertainties, not only for companies, but for the users. We also have privacy regulation, the Cookies Directive, and in our opinion, there are many things in that regulation that come into conflict with a general regulation of data protection. From the point of view of analysis of the electronic communications code, well, we see very positively the fact that those questions about data protection are being looked at. But we believe that over-regulation goes against this principle and prevents the unleashing of that potential and prevents us from taking advantage of all those opportunities. The second pillar is security. About security, I was talking to the Commissioner a few minutes ago about it. I wanted to congratulate them because of the cybersecurity strategy that they've implemented at a European level. It's not just a matter of hackers. We're very sensitive to the recent cyber attacks, and we've collaborated with all institutions to reduce this gap. But we see it from 3 points of view. First of all, the responsibility that technology users have, not just Microsoft technology, but other types of technology. The responsibility of the industry. We clearly have a responsibility to have secure platforms. And finally, the responsibility of governments. A lot of these attacks originate in countries where there should be a new Geneva Convention that prevents states from attacking private companies. And I also want to refer to other things, privacy, for example. All the users of our technology should know what data we're dealing with, how we're dealing with them, for them to understand that the data doesn't belong to Microsoft, but they belong to the users. And it's not just a responsibility of the industry, it's a responsibility of governments, how they use data, what kind of access they give to information, so that we can, once again, with those public data, we can promote the development of local ecosystems. And finally, and I'm coming to the end of my time, we have the pillar of inclusiveness, which is very important for us as well. How much are we trying, how hard are we trying to have an inclusive society from a digital point of view? I think Europe is a very good place to analyze this. Obviously, there's collaboration between many countries, but there's also the regional vision, and also how we're doing with China, with the US. It's not a matter of nationalities, it's a matter of developing a social system. On a personal note, I believe this is one of the lighthouses of civilization, Europe. So if what we can contribute to that, if technology can promote that, well, that'd be great. And with this, I conclude. I have a very quick question that I know you will answer very quickly as well. Right now, how would you position the European Union versus the US, China, South Korea, and Japan in a ranking? And what position would the European Union be? Or is it lagging very much behind? Well, let me mention some data about how technology is being used, especially cloud computing. Spanish companies, 26% of them use cloud computing for their email solutions. In my opinion, that number should be much greater in order to make sure that that technology is used for other developments. When we see how much of that technology is used for artificial intelligence, we're talking about less than 10%. And if we compare it with other regions, well, the US is much more advanced, and so are China and Korea. Mr. Serra, the industry spoke, Microsoft spoke, and now how do you see the market, the steps that are being taken in the single digital market from the point of view of telecommunications? Well, I believe that in order to understand, sorry, the microphone is off. If someone could please turn on Mr. Serra's microphone.
Unos dicen que termina la edad contemporánea y empieza otra, unos dicen que lo que termina es la civilización occidental y empieza otra. Hay quienes dicen, entre otros el historiador Harari, que lo que estamos es en un cambio de on desde la evolución darwiniana de la humanidad ha sido decidida por la naturaleza y ahora con el control del ADN y las técnicas de todo tipo va a ser...
Microphone, please.
La profundidad del cambio que estamos viviendo, estamos empezando a vivir. Yo creo que es claro que el mundo dentro de 30 años casi no se parecerá nada al mundo de hace 30 años. Que este cambio que ha producido lo que llaman la revolución tecnológica, que tiene muchas facetas, pero hay una clave, que es los adelantos en las tecnologías de la comunicación y de la información. Casi abarca el 80%, puede hablarse también de la medicina, los avances en medicina, pero las tecnologías de información y comunicación son un elemento nuclear. Este cambio tecnológico ha propiciado un cambio, que no se le puede llamar tecnológico, pero sin consecuencia, que es la globalización. Por primera vez lo que hablaban los filósofos del siglo XX de la aldea global. Lo que hablaban de...
What you were saying about the global village is a reality. What is a global village? Well, the fact that we are starting to be together. Humankind has always grown. We started with a clan and a tribe, etc., and now we are in the era of supranational entities. And the first model, which is experimental at a global scale. For example, Latin America doesn't have it. There are other nations that have had a continental, transnational dimension, like China or the US. We don't have that in Europe. And we see that in Europe, there's a British historian who said that the greatest novelty of the second part of the second millennium, from 1500 to 2000, is that Europe ruled the world. Europe accounts for 6% of the world population, and for 500 years we have ruled over hundreds of millions, 94% of the world population. Now the same thing is happening with the US. So what happens with Europe? We're lagging behind. And listening to these two gentlemen, I see that we're definitely lagging behind. When we talk about the industry, we always say, oh, the US has built a giant company, General Electric. The Americans have created General Motors. In the 21st century, the giants of the world, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, how many of them are European? None. Zero. So there's something about Europe where, even though we've been leaders of the world for many years, we've probably grown old. We're letting others get all the assets and all the opportunities. Even China, which hasn't done much for many years now, it's so big that they're making a lot of progress. So I think we in Europe have a gold opportunity. We have to accelerate European unity if we want to continue to rule the world, if we want to have a voice that is heard. Has anyone heard in the last 100 or 200 or 1,000 years, has anyone heard talk about Turkmenistan? Has anyone heard that voice? We Europeans who were used to having our voice heard, the voice of freedom, equality, and fraternity, the voice of human rights, the voice of respect for minorities, separation of powers, that voice will no longer be heard.
And suddenly there is an opportunity that we can join this technology. Later on, you'll have to explain the information. I don't know if it's updated, but Internet was born as a consequence of military research in the US from the Pentagon.
Tenemos una tecnología.
So we have a technology that will be more useful the more extended it is. And there's something that we don't hear too often. The union means freedom. As people are separate, we build walls and we restrict freedom and liberty. As we can bring the walls down and do away with hurdles, we increase freedom. So, and this has happened throughout history.
La gente, aquí había
In the 10th century, there was a saying that said, the air of the city makes you free. Because in the countryside, the people were not free. They were, of course, under their masters. And he just said a sentence in German, the air of the city makes you free. Well, now the air of the union makes you free. If we want Europe to continue to be the voice of human rights, freedom, equality, etc., we need to bring down those barriers. And that is a requirement for the technology of digitization. Well, the more people it reaches, the cheaper it will be. So, and Europe, and you already said that, has a very good digital infrastructure. Yes, I'm going to finish in a minute. But in Spain, where we still have a complex of inferiority, because we talk about Europe and Spain as if it were the others. We're also Europe, I remind you. And Europe and Spain in digital infrastructure has more kilometers than the UK on fiber optics. And then Germany and then Italy together. So if there is something that we can brag about, it's about infrastructure. Unfortunately, we don't use it as much as we should. But this is a competitive advantage that we have and that we need to take advantage of. If I may, I would like to go back to something that Ms. Stenberg said in the previous panel, which is the projection that in 2 years in the European Union, there will be a deficit of 800,000 people with talent, cybernetic and technological talent. So, to Gabriel Lopez, because Microsoft is a talent hunter by nature, why don't you tell us about what you find today? Do you really see that there is a shortfall of talent in the European Union? And of course, the others may add to what he says. Thank you, Anna. Yes, in effect, that volume of jobs that will be necessary, the focus, for example, on cybersecurity, it's even more serious, the lack of talent that we have, because it's one of the areas where we see that more talent is required, more companies to participate in this ecosystem. And nevertheless, this is related to how somebody can learn how to write security code. Well, from universities, I mean, that's where you learn. Do we have the right programs for people to learn to do this? Do we have the ability to reconvert all the people? Perhaps it's not, what we need today is to write security code. Do we have the necessary courses so that those people can convert into these new business areas? Well, sincerely, yes, there are, but they're not permeating yet as much as we would like.
De talento, y esto lo vemos desde el punto de vista meramente, digamos, de teoría económica. Una revolución industrial.
When there is an industrial revolution that we think we're living an industrial revolution today, well, there might be an off-skill or de-skill. An off-skill in the first industrial revolution. Let's concentrate, for example, in how fabric was made. Well, you needed some craftsmen who were specialized to break the cotton seed and to start to form that built fabric. And it required a lot of labor. And when the Industrial Revolution came, a machine did it all. So all the skills that these craftsmen had did not fit in that new reality. And when we analyze the internal combustion machine, well, that generated the need for new skills. So let me say it in very simple terms. To dig a hole, you can do it with a shovel or with a machine, an excavator. And you need skills in order to handle that machine. So where are we right now? Are we eliminating skills that are unnecessary? Are we obtaining the new skills that are going to be necessary? And let me be honest, we don't have an answer for everything. We do see this in the development of security code and in artificial intelligence code.
De acuerdo, que con una precisión. Yo a esta revolución no le llamaría.
I wouldn't call this revolution industrial revolution. All of them have replaced muscle by machine. This revolution replaces neurons by machines. And therefore, it's much deeper than the previous industrial revolutions. But I very much agree with the fact that right now, we don't have the skills that are needed. And you explained this very well in other previous revolutions. Talent is biology plus education. And biology is what it is. You cannot change that, but you can change education. And we are investing a lot of money in education. We're spending a lot of money in training people who are going to spend their whole lives unemployed. We spend money in training them for something that is not useful. Nevertheless, 5 years ago, I heard that in 2020 we would need 900,000 telecommunication engineers in Europe. It's true. But apart from that, we don't detect talent. In Spain, according to the research, there's something like 8 million people who are educated. 430,000 are super intelligent. But we don't know where they are. We don't know where the talent is. And that talent of these super intelligent people sometimes fail in school because they're not given what they need. And then when we put them into the school system, we put them on the wrong place because there is a problem, and that is that computer science, which is necessary. How many computer science teachers or professors do we have in Spain? So we don't have professors who are ready to teach that. So this requires that we look for them and that we give them positions of responsibility. But these have to be younger people, digital natives. Well, I totally agree with Eduardo when he talks about talent management. Education structures, of course, change very, very slowly. Just to give you an example, I'm studying machine learning in a platform where Microsoft is, the University of Columbia, and MIT. There is no European institution involved. Now, this is something that Europeans, if we're not aware of that, we're going to fail. And of course, we need social consensus. We need leadership. So from the political point of view, somebody has to say, yes, we're going to change the professional careers of scientists in Spanish universities, and we're going to take on a huge political cost. I'm sure there's going to be lots of strikes, but I'm thinking about 15 or 20 years into the future. Like in Finland. Finland was a country from one day to the next. They got huge ratios in education quality, completely changing the careers of teachers. What does that mean? Hitting a wall. I always say the first who innovates, the first who creates, the first who breaks the status quo is going to bleed. He's going to hit the wall. But he's going to look for the lowest wall possible. We need politicians who look for that smaller wall. I come from university, and I'm working on these things. And I was expelled from university. And in Spain, the education system is designed for another century. In Spain, we go from the railway of the 19th century to high-speed train, but between one and the other, there has to be something. So we have technical training programmers. It's a cultural change. The way in which institutions have to be managed and led is different. It's impossible to manage and attract talent if the way in which we manage our institutions in terms of transparency, for example, doesn't change. But that doesn't change from one day to the next. Otherwise, we're not taking advantage of a huge potential in terms of opportunities. For example, something as simple as a family work balance. We're excluding women's talent, people who can't have access to a career. So there are huge structural problems, and there are difficulties for someone to develop his life project in a different way as we have been doing so in the past few decades. As I forget, I have to use a microphone. Okay, sorry for that. Now, in the first session, we had institutional speakers, the European Commission, from the Presidency of the Council this semester, and from Spain. If you, and I'm addressing you because I know you have a shopping list. You came with a shopping list here. If you had to act as advisor for European rulers as to how to create the European digital market, taking into account what we already heard in the previous session and this one, respecting privacy, the cyber attacks, protecting ourselves against that. In that list, shopping list or list of advices for European leaders, what would you tell them? Well, with all my humbleness and respect, I can give my opinion, for example, as to how I would like to approach. Just to give you an example, my house. How would I approach regulations in my home? Objectives, metrics, technology. What is it that we are missing? Well, not only is it digital transformation of the industry or of society, but also of public institutions. How do we establish, for example, clear objectives in regulations? How do we measure them? Not necessarily all regulations need to have a long life. If we don't introduce the right metrics as you make progress in time, one of the things that we are missing are those targets. How can we measure that, for example, all these excellent market initiatives in the digital market are going to be achieved? We don't have a number, we don't have a population figure, but we have that, but how? How are we going to go about it? What tools are regulators using to do that assessment when it comes to designing the regulations? And going into a very an issue, the regulation for data protection. To date, there are more than 20 implementation acts in Europe. A regulation where the main point of the regulation was to harmonize one of the fundamental rights which is most important, not only in Europe, but in the world. We are observing that several member states are adopting in those 57 articles in the regulation, developing implementation acts that once again are going to generate a certain level of conflict. That generates more or less protection for citizens. Well, once again, how do you measure it? How do you establish, yes, we are protecting citizens more if we do it this or that way? Sincerely, that is where we need to work in the design of the regulations. Okay, if I understood you correctly, too much and too chaotic is what the regulation looks like today. Mr. Serra, do you have anything to add to that? Nothing. Do you have a shopping list or suggestions? I think that the 10 Commandments could be summarized into, here the commandment is summarized as follows. The sooner the European Union has more power, the better. Because hurdles are created because power structures need to be maintained. I don't know what the shopping list is, but what can happen is that the different members have their own shopping list. We said this about the education system. 5 years ago, we prepared a document that we took to the king that was called Transform Talent. The first thing that we were asking for was a pact, an agreement for education. That is not done because politicians don't want it, because they discuss whether they should have official languages or religion should be taught or not. That's what they spend their time discussing. Meanwhile, our children, unlike the Finnish children, are in a worse situation to compete with their competitors tomorrow, who will be the Brits or the German. So I think that the shopping list is very large. I would start with education, but before that, more power to the European Union is what is required. Okay, so it was said in the previous panel and in this one too, this revolution or change of century or however you want to call it is a significant dramatic change. And it has economic consequences in production and in the economy. It has consequences in social relations and also in the political discourse. In these past 2 years, in any discussion, in any forum, where they're discussing the boom of populism and protectionism, not only in Europe, but in the United States as well. The counter-argument, and I'm talking about political consequences, the counter-argument of the discourse against immigration, for example, is a data that says, no, it's new technologies that are eliminating jobs. It's not immigrants, it's new technologies that have to be blamed. So since you are in the industry, could you talk about that, about the people who are being left behind? Do we have a clear idea of what the advantages are? Yes, we know that, but there are people who are being left behind. Well, yes, I think I also buy that argument. It is true that there is a sort of reaction against globalization. It's usually identified in faces in terms of diversity, but there's something which is automation and so on. Today, we are still in a very primary level still, although many production processes have been automated already, and the estimates of the OECD vary depending on the methodologies, but there are many routines and tasks carried out by people who are going to be automated, Perhaps these are not complete working processes. I'm going to, but for example, a hotel receptionist can be replaced by a machine. And we need to face this debate as in a rational manner. Obviously, we're not going to say that the technology is the enemy and all of that, but we're lacking a lot of education from the point of view of the society. People should be aware of the changes that are going to affect us on a daily basis, and as well, and education also among politicians. Luis was talking about the welfare state. We need to go for different social pacts because the economy is going to be different, because the way in which we organize our lives is going to be different, and that is going to include precisely that structural unemployment of people who cannot be recycled. It's dramatic because we treat them like goods and we classify them as no longer useful because the productive system doesn't need them anymore. We'll have to invest in training. We'll have to invest in all those measures, just as, for example, when markets are freed up. And we always say, well, any free trade agreement is going to entail some costs from some sectors that are less competitive. They're going to have to compete in a global market. We'll have to look in a well-balanced and inclusive manner for those compensation mechanisms, but facing this in a serene manner. It's not all or nothing in those very emotional debates. In 1800, which is when I was born, in the US, 33% of the population worked in agriculture. Today, it's less than 2%. Agricultural production is greater now than in 1800, and the 30% who left the countryside are not unemployed. And so people were against machines because they thought that they were going to eliminate or take away their jobs. Now, Oxford University 2 years ago said that in the next 20 years, we would lose 45% of the current jobs. An ulterior study from another university says that it won't be 45%, but 75%. Our jobs are going to be created, but there's going to be difficulties. In 10 years, they say we will have self-driven cars. But what about and truck drivers? We have lots of truck drivers who are going to be left without a job. So it's absolutely essential to have a social pact, because perhaps for the first time, jobs won't be necessary. Because how much money do you have? It depends on how much you work and what your job is. But now jobs are not going to be the way that people are going to get money. So how are we going to make a living then if those jobs are no longer there, and that's not how we make money? Well, some things I don't agree with. I'd like to give you a practical example. For example, the development on smart cities. I think it was 4 or 5 months ago, there was a demonstration in the city of Madrid where all the taxi drivers were demonstrating against the Uber. But perhaps in 2 years, we're going to have the Uber people demonstrating against the self-driven cars. And that's a reality. Now, once again, if we focus on a specific example, how many jobs do you think are going to be developed when we have self-driven cars from the point of view of IoT devices, from the point of view of new signaling systems, from the point of view of knowledge of programming for cars? Imagine, if I may, let me go back to 1914 when cars were being introduced in all cities and they were paving the streets. What new type of pavement are we going to need for self-driven cars? What new workshops are we going to need? What jobs is that going to generate? So I agree that we need a social pact, but the speed of change is of the essence. How are we going to help all the people who today have certain skills for the profession that they develop today for the future? I am a lawyer. I am a lawyer, and every day I find applications that are doing my job more efficient, but that are taking away, or I am competing against my voice. So when I go on holiday, I leave answers to questions that we get regularly. So I'm replacing myself. My voice is replacing myself. So where am I going to give value? Yes, a social pact is necessary, but the responsibility is from the citizen, the company, and institutions. If the citizen does not take on the responsibility and says, well, either I start to work now or I do as much as I can to improve my skills, that would represent a problem for him or her. And it will be a problem for society if we cannot convey the need for every individual to take on responsibility of his or her professional career, because we're going to live longer, because pensions, the way they're designed today, won't work, and we'll need to work more years. We don't know that yet, though. Okay, so let's take questions from the audience. I know that this digital single market has many questions that still have to be answered. So the first question is for you, because you were the first to raise your hand. Yes, this is for Gabriel. What worries me is how data is managed. I know that Facebook is free because I give them my data. It might be that Facebook sells my data to a supermarket so that they know what food I like to eat. But then there's another chain, they sell it to another, they sell it to another. So at the end, it might be sold to a company that is not reliable. That is my fear. And then teleworking. Please, private and public companies should know what teleworking is and why don't they do it? Because we save a lot of time, we will reduce pollution. So please, it should be used. Please, why can't they start using teleworking already? Because we have to go and back, driving back and forth, wasting time, polluting our city, when we could do the same job from your home. And number 3, for Eduardo Serra. You say education is basic and that we need to change the education system in Spain. Yes, but you always compare us to Finland. But look at the spending of Finland as a percentage of their GDP and how much we spent in Spain, which is 1.5 points less than the European average. Okay, let's group the questions. Let's take another one now. Yes, computing, quantic computing. They say that that is coming soon. Do we have to invest so much in cybersecurity? Perhaps we should develop that other field more. I don't know. And because they say that that is going to do away with cyber risk. And then there are a lot of data. In my computer, for example, as soon as I open it, I have several applications that start to send data. And in the EU, they haven't thought about that. I haven't said that I should check whether I want that data to be sent or not. What? It's as if we had a highway where the car is empty. It's not sending anything. And when fiber comes, perhaps there's enough space. And so more spent in infrastructure where perhaps it isn't necessary because we're sending things that are unnecessary. So, are you dealing with this as well in the EU? Once again, the first fear is my data going from hand to hand. I cannot talk about other platforms. I can only talk about my experience and what I know about our technology. Spanish legislation, specifically in terms of data protection, is one of the best. The Organic Act for Data Protection and its regulations. There are a lot of regulations. You were talking specifically about ulterior treatment. For example, in terms of data treatment or processing, the data chief officer needs to reach a corresponding agreement with the subcontractor, let's call him that way. In turn, you will have to set limits that will have to be to comply with the Organic Act of Data Protection. Now, the regulation for data protection is even more restrictive. It establishes even more guarantees precisely to safeguard these things that you were talking about. What we're doing precisely is to develop all those technical capabilities to make sure that those issues are complied with. Now, why did they come up with this regulation? So that those who don't comply can be penalized if they don't comply. Now, but once again, I cannot talk about what Facebook does or not, but there is a regulation and it has to be fulfilled. It has to be abided by. And this specific point, I think, sufficiently dealt with in the privacy regulations. That's covered. Now, teleworking. We agree. Not only does that have to do, and you mentioned it too, I think, it's a structural thing. It's inclusivity. It's providing a balance. It's being productive when you need to be productive. It's a matter of trust. Trust in the labor relation and in the technology. Trust that it will work properly. So, I can only agree with you. Yes, let me come up with one answer and two remarks. Okay, so my answer is yes. With money, you can fix anything. More money for education, of course, and for healthcare and for security. The problem about money is that every year we spend more than what we make. And our children who are going to live with very little job security, we already provide them with a debt equivalent to our GDP. The problem is that whether we spend properly. Before I said that in education we waste money. And the education system has been created not for children or students, but for professors. It has been created to satisfy teachers, not students. So we have teachers who have been trained for things that are no longer necessary. So if we can spend more, yes. But meanwhile, let's spend the money better, because we are wasting money. Now, teleworking. I work in a private company. And in our Alicante factory, we did teleworking. And we had to close it because nobody wanted to do it. We said, you only have to come 1 day a week. And the other days you can work from home. But they didn't like it. They don't like to spend maybe all day at home. Or they don't like, the wife wants the husband to leave. You know, so they didn't like it. So we had decided not to do it anymore. And with regards to what you said about data, it's true what you said. We have legislation that does protect our users, our citizens, but the problem is that data at the end are used for things we don't want them to be used for. Like, who likes to put likes in mobiles? The latest studies say that 100 likes, they know you better than your working colleagues. 200 likes, they know you better than your wife. And 300 likes, they know you better than yourself. Now, this has been used in the presidential elections in the United States. In the re-election of Obama, there were 16 million profiles, for 76% of which the vote intention changed. And in Trump's 250 million profiles. In other words, the whole of the American electorate. So, very careful with data, we have to be. More questions? There's something that I'm particularly interested in that was discussed here, particularly you, Mr. Serra, and that is the treatment of those sectors that unavoidably are going to be left behind. What do we do with them? Let me give you an example. In Spain, mining is still subsidized. Coal is still being subsidized. We still buy fruit at a more expensive price than it would cost us if we bought it in Morocco, for example. So I understand that the government is to defend its people, but I also understand that the function of the government is to look forward in 15 years and say, well, if I finance this, I am going to have problems in the future.
So, yes, it's true that we have to help people who are now in the fruit business or in the mining business. You said something about minimum wage. And what about the taxi drivers? What do we do with them in the short term? We have to do something with those people, otherwise we won't be able to change the production model. That's a $1,000 question, but let's see. Schumpeter, one of the best economists of all time, said that innovation, creation, means sometimes the death of an industry, a way of working. When cars were developed, it was the silversmiths that were left without a job. So if we keep protecting, if governments keep protecting people who do things in the way they used to years ago, then the country will die. So we have to ensure a minimum wage, but it should be really minimum so that they will have an incentive to find another job or to move to another industry. We have resources that are used sometimes that are not being used in a very productive way. We have to do it socially, but if so, then give people a minimum wage, but don't help them to lead the kind of life they had before technological progress. In Spain, one of the things that we should improve is the way we debate things. We're aware of the many problems these countries have, but once we start with the debate, the solutions, we find at the end of the day have to do with things that are very accessory to the root of the problem. So I think we need to be more gradual, not technocratic in the sense that everything should be technical. No, we should be more rational. A very good example, private-public management, PPPs. One of the ways we have to do these things is through PPPs. In Spain, we have an ideological bias. We don't like to see the public sector in the private sector and vice versa. If I'm ultra-liberal, I don't want to be regulated, and if I'm very progressive, I don't want the hospital to be private. And this means that we don't think in a rational way. Funding can be public, but we can learn a lot from the private sector. In Spain, we have 60% of hospitals that don't have any type of digitization. It's just paperwork, and that prevents us from improving public health. So I believe what we need is a lot of flexibility. We need to be more plural. Let's have a national vision. Let's see where we want to go. We need talent, etc. The representative of the European Union, what do you have to say? Taking advantage of the fact that you are present in this second session and to promote dialogue between institutions, etc. Is there something you want to say? Thank you very much. And hello again. I very much agree with everything that has been stated here. We definitely have to open the doors and not divide things into silos. I represent a public administration at a European level. We're also paid by European taxpayers. So we have to open up, and we need to work with companies. But we also need to work with academia, because that's where ideas come from. Because they're the first ones to learn about something that is being developed. We want to be leading edge an administration at the European Commission. We want to move forward, and we need to work hand in hand with national governments. But for that, we need to open up, and we have to work hard. And then, talking about the fact that some jobs will become obsolete because of development, yes, that is going to happen. But how many people will be affected by it? I have my doubts, because at the same time, new jobs are created. So the final result, I don't think anyone can say what it's going to be. It's very difficult to predict, especially the future, as Oscar Wilde used to say. So we have to do research, we have to develop new fields, new areas of work, and there's also personal accountability. It's true. Each of us have to take responsibility of one's future. We need to improve the educational system, but we have to be very much aware of personal accountability and responsibility. Because if we expect others to solve our problems for us, that's going to be very difficult. Any more questions from the floor? Miguel Angel? Yes, I was very interested to hear this whole discussion, but I found very relevant what Eduardo Serra said about the failure of telework companies. As a friend used to say, you have to leave your home even if it's just to go and see a parade. Or as someone else used to say, there's no place like being away from home. Talking about minimum wage, well, if we ever reach that minimum wage, minimum wage, yes, we have to make sure that it doesn't have the effect of making people end up living off the government and not having an incentive to work. But at the same time, we have huge training and educational gaps. I believe we haven't been trained to enjoy leisure. I would recommend you to read Bertrand Russell when he said that he had been educated, just like everyone else in society, to think that leisure is the mother of all vices. But then he realized that you need leisure to make progress. I don't know, maybe we should prepare young people for leisure, because it seems that they've only been trained to become activists. I think we have time for a few more questions. Please. Or maybe you can ask each other. I can see you're taking notes of everything that is said. Well, first of all, talking about the minimum wage or basic wage. Well, there's also experience during the history of mankind with that kind of income. In Austria, I can't remember in what period of history, but during this process of industrial transformation, especially as a result of the development of the steam engine, there was a group that was left out of a job suddenly, because Austria, at the time, they said, we develop all the machines, and from now on we are going to do everything like this. And a lot of people in a town were left without a job. So what did they do? Well, they said, we're going to invest in a minimum wage, a basic income for all these people who have this problem. And that generated two phenomena. The first one, a problem of dignity. People who received this basic wage, this basic income, didn't feel happier because they were getting this support. They felt discriminated against other people who had a job, and they didn't. Secondly, there was a problem of lack of innovation in that group of people. Eventually, they decided to abandon the project. I'm not saying that that is the solution for today's problem. There are other tools, we have better knowledge, but the truth is that it's a phenomenon that has to be approached also from the point of view of human dignity. When we talk about training for leisure, well, I think it's a very good idea. Recently, we had a meeting with one of the governments in the Mediterranean Union, which had a great tourist industry. And talking to one of them, they said, it's all very good to invest in startups. It's all very well to have all these aids and things, but what we need is for investment to continue in companies that already exist. We have to help companies, small companies to become medium-sized, and other companies large companies to become even bigger. It's a very important idea, because it seems that all programs have been designed to invest in an area where there's overinvestment. And the second comment, and this has to do with equality and distribution of income. Well, the truth is that the tourism economy suffers from a great inequality because of a kind of jobs that are needed. And what this developer said was, we don't want to be an economy of waiters. We want to have an economy with developers and people who create value not only for the region, but for Europe and the world. Because it's true that Spain is a big country in terms of tourism, but it has a lot to teach other regions as well. So that's what I wanted to say. Anything else? I very much agree. The representative from the Commission said that we all have to be aware of the fact that we're responsible for our own lives, and having the government help everybody is a bad philosophy. I think that lack of entrepreneurship has brought us to this point. I believe that now, with the new working conditions, things are going to change. And what you said about numbers is true. No one knows whether it's 45, 70%. The idea was to show a trend. The last things I've read, well, there will be a robot that will cost 100 euros that will do all the tasks of an agricultural worker. And the computer will tell the robot what to do every morning. We're starting a time that doesn't necessarily have to be bad. It will just be different. There will be dramatic changes, but it doesn't have to be worse. And what Miguel Angel said, well, this is happening already. For those of us, there hasn't been any complaint when city councils organize parties, concerts, etc. You need to educate people in leisure. And I believe, as Bertrand Russell said, I don't think that leisure is the source of all vices. We've started with the single digital market. We're starting to talk about sales on the internet, and we've ended with a discussion on philosophy. Is there anything you want to say to conclude this debate? I would also go back to the issue of the European Commission. I agree with everyone that this is a new situation for everyone. And we're going to have to use our wisdom. And this is very important. And we need critical judgment. That is why at the beginning of my presentation, before the city was full of cars, their main concern was how to eliminate horse poop. So if we expect to find answers, we have to have lower expectations. Well, I have several problems. One of them is that I'm too optimistic. I see there's a great opportunity to bring together all the knowledge that we have as civilization and bring it together with this new technological opportunity. Everything we can do was unthinkable some years ago. We've never been through a period where money was cheaper than today. It's never been easier to develop a business. So what is missing to feed that engine? There are ideas, there are investments. So I think we have the necessary ingredients to once again make use of this great value this great asset that this continent has, and, well, use technology for that. 1 minute for advertising. No. I just wanted to say that digitization, which started as something no one understood what it was about, is going to affect us all in every area of our life. So there's a market here. For example, an agreement has been reached with Amazon to sell through Amazon. That is going to jeopardize the market. When people think about something digital, they think about Microsoft, but what's digital is like water and is going to flood everything. So if we're afraid of losing jobs, well, in my opinion, the best advice would be to digitize yourself, and the more the merrier, and the more the better. So we should find a good place to enjoy leisure with telework and provide services in that single market. Okay, thank you very much to the three of you. Thank you very much to the organizers of these 2 sessions. Thank you.